welcome back to another episode of Conversations, the show where we have conversations that maybe if we talked about these things a little bit more, people might feel a little bit more supportive in their journeys, both in life and in business. Hello, Sam. We were here. We were late, but it's fine. I was slamming a sandwich in my face. It was very important, and we had to wait until that was done. It was not a tech problem. It was a Tracy didn't eat lunch on time problem. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. What we're here to talk about today is something that actually came up in a conversation between Betty and myself. And it's that maybe there's not quite enough conversation around what to do next when you don't know what to do next. And how many times does this happen to people? I mean, like, I know this happens to me a lot, right? When you're like, I don't know what to do with this information. And it's happened to me in business and it's happened to me in life. So we were like, we should probably just have this conversation because who else is having that conversation? No one, just us. You're in the right place. So welcome everybody, Sam and Robert and Jay and Yolanda and Steven. Thank you so much for joining us. Anybody else who is here with us in the chat as well, let us know that you're here. This is not just a conversation for Tracy and Betty, but it is a conversation for all of us. And as I said, this is kind of a global phenomenon, right? There's things, and as the world changes and as we evolve as humans, we don't always know what comes next or what to do next. So really excited to open up this conversation for everybody today. And let's explore together. So before we get into the conversation, let's learn a little bit more about my lovely guest, Betty. Oh, hi, Jackie. Jackie always shows up as LinkedIn user. I should just know it's Jackie. Betty, tell us a little bit more about you and why this topic of conversation sounded like the right one for today.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it earlier. It was something that came out of our early conversation. Like, well, we're going to be together on Friday. What do we want to talk about? What's next in life? And I just had a full admission of like, I don't know. A lot has happened this year and things that were challenging and like great and inspiring at the same time. But that usually means like I'm at a moment where I just need to like figure out all the pieces and nothing's quite settled. So I don't know. It's just like the mode of being for a little while longer for me. Yeah. As for introduction of myself, hi everyone. My name is Betty Chan. I'm an authenticity coach. And what that means something a little different for each person. And I always find it hard to summarize it in a nutshell because it's hard to summarize us human beings into a nutshell, right? So I think the best and closest way I've gotten to really is just working with folks to help them expand how they see themselves so that they can start expanding their understanding of what they're capable of doing. And the intention of that is that you get to move closer to the person you intend to be, not what your mom told you to be, not what your bestie told you to be, not what your boss thought you were going to be, which they all might be relevant and informative, but really listening to yourself and your inner wisdom to guide you forward.
Oh, man, this is, I think, one of the things that is a common misconception about like personal branding as well is that like this is very much about like you figuring out who you are and who you want to be and not what like as society likes to tell you what to be. And your teacher, I mean, I've had so many like really experiences people have shared with me that make me really sad, and that like a teacher told them they can never be an artist, right? And you're like, slap, who was that? But there's people who are telling us that all the time, right? I used to get the message that I was no good at hiring because like a lot of the employees I hired didn't work out. But then what I realize now is that like what my boss was hiring for and what I was hiring for were two different things. Oh, and they always ended up in conflict. And so it wasn't actually about me. Like, yes, I was a contributing factor, but it wasn't just me being bad at a thing. And there's so many narratives in society that tell us. And one of the really interesting words that you brought up in your introduction, Betty, was expand. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a critical component of what we're talking about today, which is what to do next when you don't know what to do next. Mm-hmm. Because if you're in this space where you're like, I don't know what to do next, likely the answer doesn't already exist in your space. And so this opportunity for you to expand in multiple different ways. So Betty, can you share with us a little bit more when you talk about expanding, and maybe even specifically with regards to this question, like where are some of the areas that we could start expanding in?
Yeah. And, like I use that word intentionally because it's expansion of how we see ourselves, what options are available. And I totally agree with you that sometimes it's like looking for something that's not available in our space, like maybe a different inspiration, different idea outside of ourselves. But one of my favorite places to start looking is actually at our own blind spots, right? Like sometimes it's already in our space, but it's something that we've been so accustomed to that we stop seeing, or I'm going to put it more simply. A phrase that I've been hearing myself say out loud very often is that I'm taking some things about myself for granted, right? Like things that you're really good at, that you've been good at for most of your life, we think it's easy. And when things are easy, we start to take for granted and we don't give it the same amount of appreciation versus the skills that we're striving to work towards. So I think that's a wonderful place to start expanding and looking. And sometimes it's just starting closer to home.
Yeah. I love this concept of showing appreciation because it's for one, I'm a big Dale Carnegie fan, and it's one of Dale Carnegie's golden rules to show appreciation. So we'll just throw that in there. But in that context, it's often talking about showing appreciation for other people. And I think you're right, Betty, that it's very, I think it just doesn't make it to the top of the priority list, right? We're so busy and we're doing things, and then we use our extra time to appreciate other people, but we forget to appreciate those things about ourselves. And it's interesting that that's what you see too, is that kind of goes unnoticed, because there's I work with a lot of people who want to create content, right? So they're either trying to build a business or build a personal brand so they can get the job they want, and that they're creating content associated with that. And almost always people are like, well, I can't say that. That's so basic. Right? And you're like, well, there's like a generic level of basic in whatever industry you're speaking to. But so often our genius makes things seem simple that we don't notice. And other people, when you say them, people are like, oh my gosh, that's so profound. And you're like, really? That's like what I say to my kid every day when he wakes up. And it just starts to become like, it's so ingrained as a part of you that you don't notice that it's a special part of you. And so I think that this opportunity to just like take a minute and show appreciation for the thing that you're awesome about, and separate whatever anybody told you about being selfish or self-centered, and how you must be humble and don't be conceited and all of these things, and just park those for a minute and give yourself the space to appreciate who you are. And I would love for everybody, actually everyone who's joining us, I would love for you to just explore that for yourself in this moment. What is something that you appreciate about you? And it's really cool because I'm thinking about things that I appreciate about all of the people in the chat. So it'll be interesting to see what they say about themselves. But like, these are the things. So Betty, let's practice what we preach. What is something that you appreciate about yourself?
Damn, you're putting me on the spot right away. Okay. Something I appreciate about myself, I would say just my gentleness, right? Not to be mistaken for weakness. And for those of you who do, you're in for a sore treat. But just holding the gentleness and seeing that can be powerful as well.
Yeah.
What about you, Tracy?
Well, first of all, I want to share something I appreciate about you, Betty, because we had some conversations, and this is Betty's first LinkedIn Live, everyone. And I just want to appreciate about you your willingness to try something new and try something that you're a little bit afraid of. And hopefully Tracy takes care of me in this, which I plan on doing. But there's still a lot of people who don't take that step, right? So I am appreciating that about you. And on that note, I'm going to appreciate the fact that I think I'm a pretty darn good facilitator of conversations. And for a long time I thought like, that's just a thing anybody can do, right? But what I have learned more and more is that this is not something everybody can do. And more importantly, it's not something everybody wants to do. And it's something that I really love to do. Like, I love to shine lights on new perspectives. And I love to be, quite honestly, even challenged in my own perspective to be like, oh, do I think that? I don't know. Let me think about it. And I love the pressure of being live, right? Like, what happens live is live. You can't fake it, right? We're talking, we're both authenticity peeps. So like, there's no faking here. This is you get what you get.
And sometimes take it either at that point.
Right. When I was saying that, sometimes that means Tracy's shoving a sandwich in her face at the beginning of the show. It is what it is. Everybody, we've got some lovely shares here, so I'm going to share. So Yolanda is saying, knowing my authentic self. Yay! The authenticity coaches love that about you as well, Yolanda. Sam is sharing my honesty and ability to point out uncomfortable truths. Another thing, I love this one so much, Sam, because I think a lot of times it's hard. Like, it's hard to show up and share uncomfortable truths, right? And people might be uncomfortable. Well, they're uncomfortable truths, so they're going to make somebody uncomfortable, likely. And there's a lot of people who will just not do it, right? Like, they'll keep themselves safe and not share those things. So high five you. Stephen is sharing my ability to easily talk to people from a variety of personalities. Very strong skill that you have, Stephen. I think Betty and I both have experienced that from you. High five. Robert is sharing, I can appreciate that I come from a place of truly wanting to help others without an expectation of something in return. Oh, that's beautiful. I love that, Bob. Thank you so much for sharing, everybody. And these are the things, right? Like, kind of going off topic just a little bit, but sometimes we're in a moment or in a conversation where someone says something and you're like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And you write it down in your notebook, and it is on page 27 and you're on page 39, and it just gets lost, right? But we always have this opportunity in these moments. And I would encourage everybody always, at least always on this show, to, like, when there's something that really resonates with you, even stop listening for a minute and just sit with it and be like, what do I think about that? What do I appreciate about myself? And because all of these things are a practice, right? Authenticity is a practice. Showing appreciation to yourself is a practice. And unless we practice doing them, we don't really get that expansion that we desire by doing the activity. So it's more than just knowing. It's about intentionally creating time to experience the thing and build how you would do it.
Yeah. It's like an integration process, right? Like, we can have the thoughts all day long, but until we actually give our bodies a chance to experience what it's like, I don't think we ever get to the point of knowing, like, deep in our soul kind of knowing.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I mean, I have a tech background, so my brain goes like, oh, integration process. But it's so important in the success in that scenario, right? And equally true in this scenario, right? We need to give ourselves the space to create the integration. And there is so much feeling that's involved with that. And I would say equally, there's, when we're talking about the concept of what to do next, when you don't know what to do next, generally the feeling is, well, the one that's coming up for me is fear. I'd love to hear what you think, Betty, but like, what are some of the other emotions from your experience, Betty? Do people experience when they are like, I don't know what to do next?
Yeah. I mean, mine, because I've felt it so recently, I would say a sense of disappointment, but more in myself, right? Which then makes me go to a place of like, oh, I feel like a failure. I feel like I'm failing in the moment. The bigger moments might go to the I am a failure statement, but there are even smaller moments of like, I'm failing in this moment. But I think it all kind of stems from what you're talking about. It is a fear. It's a very like deep-seated fear.
I think it's really great too that that we look at it from a position of disappointment, because so I have this theory. Let's try it on, everybody. To me, there's like certain emotions and experiences that people are less likely to admit that they're having for themselves. And fear is one of them. So it's like not good to be afraid. So if I am afraid, then I don't want to tell people that I'm afraid, because it's not good to be afraid. It doesn't look like I'm a healthy business owner if I have fear, right? So I won't share that with people. But things like disappointment, okay, I feel like it's a little bit easier for me to give myself permission to be disappointed in something than for me to experience fear. I'd love to hear your perspective on that, Betty. And anybody else also in the chat who has perspectives on fear and any kind of emotion that we as humans tend to pretend we're not having, even though maybe our logic brain would tell us, oh yeah, we're just afraid.
Yes. I mean, it's I think there's like two levels of it. Like first just being aware of it yourself, right? I think it took me a while to be like, oh, I am kind of scared right now. I think it happened. I woke up this morning, I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna do my first LinkedIn Live. Terrified, cold sweat, chills, everything happening at the same time. And I'm just like, something feels off. That's about the only awareness I had at that moment of like, oh, something feels off this morning about how I'm waking up. And just like giving more space to that. I agree with you. Like, don't bulldoze over it. That temptation is so strong because it's taught to us, right? Like, especially as professionals, it's like, put your mask on. Anything that feels uncomfortable, stick that mask on. Like, good. I'm all good. I'm fine. I'm fine. With the building burning behind you, right? Like that meme that happens as well. So I think for me, one of the releases of it is actually just remembering that everybody, literally everybody, feels fear, right? Maybe 16 times a day. I don't know how many times a day, but being able to name that out loud. And I remember messaging you this morning, like, I'm kind of nervous, like just to say that out loud. And I noticed after I said it and admitted to another human being, it became a little less heavy and a little easier to move through the day.
Yeah. Well, and this is, I always think too, it's just a beautiful opportunity to get support, right? So, like, I shared, I'm always a little bit nervous. I'm specifically more nervous when I'm actually in person on a stage or like I'm meeting a person for the first time in person. Like, that's much more, the digital environment feels a little safer to me, which is why I hang out here. But this is, it's just people, it's physical responses, right? And when we get that opportunity to kind of separate those things and see, wow, yeah, this happened and I'm super disappointed in it, or this happened, or this is going to happen later today and I'm just a little bit terrified, right? There's an opportunity for someone to show up and be like, yeah, me too, right? You're like, oh, okay, it's not just me, right? And I don't know, I try not to keep track of all of the, like, how much time do I feel fear in a day? But like, I know I'm afraid of things, right? Like, literally right now, right before this, I was like, oh man, I'm kind of afraid of my husband texting me later and being like, what's for dinner? Because I have no plan for dinner. Chinese food is going to be my answer. But like, there's so many things, and as business owners, or if you're in that stage of your career where you're looking to transition, right? Like, yeah, there's tons of unknowns, right? So it's reasonable to be afraid, but I think it's important to I got distracted by Jay's solution for me of skip the dishes. Thanks, Jay. Jay's always providing me personal solutions in this chat. It's my favorite thing. But like, when you have that, I totally lost my train of thought. I'm all this thinking about dinner now. But the point is that we get afraid, right? And it's okay. It's okay to be afraid. And this is something that I'm actually trying to teach my son right now. He's 5. And just like, it's okay to be afraid. If you're afraid of a thing, that's okay. We just talk about it. Like, that makes me nervous because I'm afraid this might happen, or I'm afraid this might happen, or I'm afraid. It's like, our brain is very good at coming up with things to be afraid of. Yeah. I think it's that old brain that's trying to keep us safe from tigers and things like that. But the tigers aren't just running around anymore. Our brain still works like that, and it's a reasoning engine. It's trying to keep us safe. So it'd be like, what about this? What about this? Have you thought about this? This could be a fail point, right? And it's almost like we can't prevent those thoughts from happening. So what if, what do we do? We create a different relationship with those thoughts. Sam has a quick, interesting question. Is disappointment and fear the same thing? I would say yes and no. it can be tied to the same core.
It can be tied. I see disappointment as like a particular flavor of fear. And I'm actually, my eyes keep getting distracted with Bob's question earlier, like how much value do you put in disappointment or fear or any of these like not so pleasant emotions that come up when you're worried about what to do next, right? So I would say the value is actually like, what is it trying to tell you? Instead of seeing it as an emotion that, yes, it doesn't feel great and it does make us want to run. But if we are able to take that moment to slow down, like, where's the disappointment coming from? Maybe it's from years of being practiced of disappointing our parents or our peers or friends and partners and so forth. But there's information there, right? Like there's valuable information there about ourselves and what our edges are when it comes to whatever is in front of us at the moment, whatever we need to decide about what's next too.
And I think this is interesting because, Bob, I grew up being immensely afraid of disappointing my parents. So I fall into that category. And it's really interesting because one of the things that I've gotten to now is that things are going to happen. At some point, I'm probably going to disappoint my parents. At some point, I'm going to disappoint myself. At some point, I'm going to yell at my son and I didn't mean to. And like, oh, today I was on LinkedIn Live this morning. I don't know if anybody else was watching, but he came in to give me a hug, but he like flopped behind my chair because him and Daddy were friends off at the moment. And so he like, literally my husband dragged him out of the room while I was on LinkedIn Live. And I was like, okay, I'm not okay with this being how we part ways today. So luckily it was a panel. I turned my camera off. I left and I came back once I had given him some hugs. And I said to him, I'm like, I feel like you just need to be seen right now. So I'm going to see you. But regardless, the thing is that like inevitably things happen. It's kind of the reason I love lives too, right? Like something will happen. We'll have a tech glitch or I will forget where I'm going with a point or like, who knows what's going to happen. That's the fun. But when you restructure your relationship with the fact that something could happen, there's a different relationship you have with fear. I mean, I feel like I'm just learning that about myself in this moment, but like I'm literally afraid of very little things besides Nicholas being kidnapped. Like, Nicholas being kidnapped is the thing I'm afraid of. But like, I'm not afraid of going on LinkedIn Live and it glitching and everything getting lost and us having to move to Zoom and like, I'm not afraid of that. Could it happen? Yeah, it could. Would that be disappointing? Maybe. People might get lost in the transition and things like that, but will the right people who are supposed to be there today? Yeah, I think they will. And so there's more personal things I'm afraid of than business things at this point, because I'm like, what will be, and I will be ready for it. But what are your thoughts on that? Like building a new relationship with the fear and or the disappointment, Betty?
Well, I'm actually right now quite present to like my reaction, what you shared, right? Like you actually you notice there's more fear present in your personal stuff than work stuff. I feel the complete opposite. So like everyone's got like different placements of fear as well. And part of it's just like, where do we feel most in control versus not as well? And practice, right? Like the practice of like, I mean, I imagine being on so many LinkedIn Lives, it means you've got to experience all those different scenarios of breakdown, tech not working, people saying something, and you got to experience yourself going through it and surviving, right? Or even thriving at the end of it. And I think that gives us the confidence to move forward as well. But now you're gonna have to remind me of your actual question because I got
I would actually like to go to like what's happening in the chat, because there's some really great things that people are sharing about fear in the chat. So Stephen is sharing, I've definitely felt fear too, but it's usually my gut telling me that I'm not comfortable with an idea and that someone else is pushing to me. It happens when I'm trying to resist external pressure from other people. And I think from like the authenticity perspective, this is really just, I think to some degree, and maybe it's in the like parenting child relationship where we build this, but there's to some degree an expectation of like, someone's going to tell me what to do and I should do it. Right? And those gut feelings are your personal brand, your authentic you saying to you, like, I wouldn't do that. But we're not always very good at listening to that voice, because so many times we're like, just like, do what you're told, do what you're told. And even now, like, again, my son is 5, and I'm starting to notice, like, how often are people just like, just do this because I said so, right? And you're like, that's not a really good reason. So I try to come up with a good reason. There's sometimes where my son will ask me, I'll be like, let's do this. And he's like, why? And I'm like, I have no good reason. And maybe we'll do it and maybe we won't do it. Sometimes he's changed my perspective and been like, oh yeah, that doesn't make sense. Okay, let's not do that. But there's an openness that is required to get to that point too. But what would you say, because you do a lot of work in authenticity, Betty, so where would you say that feeling of, like, your gut, as some people tell you, like, what is your gut telling you in those uncomfortable moments?
Yeah. I mean, it's great because it's bouncing off something, right? Like your gut is responding to something. So, like Steven, like when you find yourself in that reaction, just naming out loud what don't you like about it, right, is one part of it. But I think most of us, even to how we talked about in the beginning, folks tell us what we can't do, what we are not good at doing. And I think the don't conversations happen a lot more in human conversations than you do of articulating what we do want. So using that as a jump off of like, okay, my gut's telling me I don't want this, but what do I want? Like giving yourself that opportunity to explore that. And that's actually a lot. It sounds simple, but it's not easy to execute because oftentimes maybe you come up with one thing, you go and move into the world and be like, okay, I do want this. And then you discover your gut has more reactions of like, no, 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 not this way. But that's the guiding that happens, right? Where you listen to your own personal brand, your gut reaction, and just being honest with yourself about what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And I think oftentimes we are taught to not be honest with ourselves, right? Just like shove it all in, forget it, just do the thing that's being said and asked of you.
Yeah.
And that you mentioned resilience is trying again.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Well, that didn't work. And I think too, I'd love to explore this with you, Betty, too, because we're both like authenticity peeps. And this is my theory, is that there's some things that are misaligned with you. And yes, while resilience is about trying again, I also think there are some things where if we pay close enough attention, it's ourselves telling ourselves that that's not something I would do. In which case, it's really not about doing it again and again and again and again. It's about letting that go and creating space for what could be an authentic representation of you.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I mean, I remember the first time you shared that with me, I was like, that's such an aha thing, right? Like resistance, there's actually multiple types. And the two that you named, one is just like, okay, are we kind of beating our heads against the wall? Is it something that is just genuinely not aligned with who we are, as opposed to just something like temporarily scary, right? Like LinkedIn Live, I don't know if I'm gonna like this or not, but I felt that resistance, but I didn't feel it for so long that I didn't want to do it, right? But I do recall times when someone asked me to do something or to join something, and I know by now I have a very big tell when I'm there, when I'm in that misaligned, which is I start pro con listing things. Like, and I would do like 3, 4 of them. And I'm like, Betty, at this point, you should know that there will be no right decision around this. There's no right or wrong way to go about it. You either do it or you don't, and then you move on from there. Right? So that's how I've learned for myself what those feel like.
Yeah, and I think this is really interesting too, because my theory is also that, like, hey, if this is something that feels scary, but it feels like something you want to try it. And if you don't like it, don't do it again. Right? So, like, if Betty hates LinkedIn Live, this might be her one and only, although I'm hoping that's not true. But I will put a special note on this episode so that people know. But that's okay, right? It's okay to try things that you're like, nope, that wasn't for me. I'm not going to do that. I've had that, like, with a lot of networking events, because I love networking and people invite me. I often go, and there's somewhere I'm just like, oh, this, no. does anybody like this? And I think there are people that do. It's just not for me, right? So like I choose a different place. And that's okay. Because I also think when we look at it from a perspective of like, ooh, there's this thing that's like making me kind of uncomfortable, but I'm gonna try it, right? The courage. Sam here is talking about a stronger will. I think that's kind of a like, do we choose? I think everything comes down to choice at the end of the day. But like, okay, I'm gonna go and try it. And then like, ooh, I kind of hated LinkedIn Live. But I really should keep doing it because my business won't be successful if I'm not on LinkedIn Live. And we try to convince ourselves, and then we start to hear other people being like, you will never be successful if you're not on LinkedIn Live. And like, we start to believe it, even though we know that it's just not the right thing for us. And I think that kind of comes back to what we were speaking about before, right? Are we creating space to figure out like what is us and what is not us? And I think coming back to the topic of today, which is what to do next when you don't know what to do next. At some point, so I mean, at that point, there's two options, right? Do nothing, which means I just sit in here and I accept that I don't know what to do next, and therefore I'm not going to do anything. Or I'm going to try something. I'm going to try something. And I don't know if it's going to work. It might work. My theory, like I've done some research and I've done some logical assessment and I've breathed into what my body tells me or whatever your process is. And I think this might work. I think this might work. Let's give it a try. I think one of the things then that, again, another fear that creeps in is like, but what if it doesn't work? Right? What if I need clients and I'm going to try this way to get clients and it doesn't work and I need to pay my bills, right? Like, what if it doesn't work? So it's funny because I'm actually working with a client on shifting his what ifs right now. So like Betty, from your experience, how do those, like even in those moments where like, okay, we've decided we're going to go and try something new. Well, how can the what ifs then become a barrier to success?
Yeah, like kind of like daydreaming about disasters, right? Like, what?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of a dramatic way to put it, but yeah.
I mean, that's how I love apocalyptic shows. This is where my brain goes all the time. Like, what if this happens? I mean, the what if itself is pretty neutral. You could do what if everything goes well? What if it actually goes better than I thought, right? So actually giving ourselves a space to ask those questions might allow us to not catastrophize a situation so much. But I know someone in the comments said it comes easier to some folks than others, and I do think that's true. But also just owning that, like, hey, maybe right now negative thoughts do come up more often than usual, right? And that's okay. That doesn't mean you're someone incapable of positive thoughts or outcome, but maybe that just right now you need a little extra support in processing that and then getting out of your own head, expanding your options by being in conversation with someone who can hold that space for you, with someone who's going to come at you with curiosity as opposed to, well, you should do this and that and try this, like advice giving at that point, right? Just hold that space where you can start processing, what did my gut tell me? What did I not? But also, even if you do try something and you find out you don't like it, you can not do it again. That's a perfectly good way to do it. Or you could try it again and just see if it offers a different experience. But the thing I like to do that I'm trying to work on personally, my intuition is to just go all or nothing, right? Like, oh, it doesn't work, toss it out, on to the next thing, do a 180, right? But there's always something I find that, like, when you go through any kind of experience, good, bad, up, down, whatever it is you want to classify it as, there's something in there that you do like. So like, what is that 10%? And then using that as a way to brainstorm other things, right? So using our example, if I find, okay, I don't love doing LinkedIn Live, but was there something in there that I did like? And then are there other ways for me to get more of that that's not on LinkedIn Live, right? So allowing yourself to get curious and creative as well. And if you can't do it on your own, do it with a friend. If you can't do it with a friend, do it with a coach. You know, there are different ways to go about that.
Yeah. And that's a really great point because like my favorite question, so the like end goal question that I have with my clients is like, how would you do that? right? So like I do LinkedIn Live one way. There's lots of people who do LinkedIn Live. They do it different ways. Some people manage comments differently. Some people have a manager, right? Like some people do lots of promos. Some people have sponsors, right? Like there's not one way to do LinkedIn Live. This is my way of doing LinkedIn Live. And I've curated it this way because it feels good for me. It feels natural. It feels authentic, which is important to me. And there isn't just one way. And in this world, there's almost never just one way of doing a thing, right? It's just looking at like, okay, yeah, this is what I liked about it. I really like the comments. This is like, maybe it'd be a little bit more like more structured if we had like specific questions that people were answering and I knew how to like when to bring those into the conversation, right? Like my friend Tara Argo and I, we are like very different on how we structure things. Like she loves a lot of structure. I hate a lot of structure. I like free flow. That's what feels more comfortable for me. More structure feels more comfortable for her. We curate our shows in different way using the same platform, right? It's available. So there's also that, like, I think there's something here that we can talk about in terms of like empowering thoughts versus disempowering thoughts. Because in the realm of, I don't know what to do next, inherently that, I mean, it could be, it's by inherently a neutral thought, like you said, like the what if, Betty, but like, if we pay attention, like how do I take that, right? Like, do I take that as a negative thing? Like I should know what to do next, but I don't know what to do next. So therefore it's a negative. Or like I was sharing earlier with Tara actually that I'm like, I don't really know what to do next. And I'm kind of excited about it, right? Like it means there's a puzzle for me to solve and I like solving puzzles. So it's like an opportunity. But these are things that we can pay attention to in our own experience and say like, okay, let's just all try it on right now. I'm going to come back to your, Robert is talking about what's the worst thing that can happen. So it's like similar things, right? If you're evaluating statements that are unlikely to happen, mitigating risk, like I'm all about mitigating risk, but at the same time, there's some things that their likelihood of happening is so slim that any effort to going into mitigating that risk is kind of a waste of, I like to call them mental calories, right? So the calories we burn by thinking about things that could happen. And so I think it's interesting to investigate our own experiences here right now. What's your own experience of risk? Is risk inherently bad? Is risk inherently good? This is why like people have different risk profiles when they make investments, right? Because everybody has a different relationship with risk. What type of things do I feel like always need to be mitigated? What type of things do I let go? Do I have a positive relationship with the unknown? Do I have a fear-based relationship with the unknown? And none of these things are bad. It's about knowing your relationship with it. So inevitably, when you come to a place where you don't know what to do next, you have a little bit of information about yourself and say like, okay, I'm prone to like panic in this scenario. And I panic because I think I'm supposed to know the answer. But like we're living in a world right now where very few people know the answers to things, right? Business is transforming at a ridiculous pace. Nobody really knows what to do next, right? Because this is something that hasn't happened before. And so now we need to think up new things. So in order for us to have the space for that, we need to know what our relationship is with it.
Yeah. And that's very personal from person to person.
Exactly. I do want to come back to, we've mentioned it a couple of times, Sam's point here about some people have a stronger will and not conforming to others' expectations is easier for some. I want to challenge this because I think that this is I think it's a skill. I think it's a skill that you build. And if we spend a lot of time conforming to others' expectations with the expectation that we're supposed to do that. So we're being a good human because that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to conform to other people's rules. Then we get a lot of practice with that story. And that's what we start to believe is how we need to show up. On the flip side, if your story is that not conforming to someone else's rules is the fast, so this is my story, right? If I just show up as my authentic self It's my fastest path to my people, right? The people who are like me. And not everybody is like me. I'm sure some people hate me, right? And that's fine. I can't be loved by 8 billion people in the world, nor do I have any intention of trying to be. But by conforming, I actually create a roadblock between my relationships with myself and other people, because now I don't know, like, is that really me? Did I conform because someone else told me I should, right? Like, it's possible that it's just me being me, but I don't actually know. I had this really I have conversations with myself quite often, especially when I'm in the car. And I was like, I really like shaving my legs. I just like feel good when my legs are shaved. The guys might not resonate with the story. But then I was like, is that really true? Or have I just literally been taught since I was so small that that is the most attractive and therefore makes you feel pretty? That I should do I believe that? And I actually got to the point where I'm like, I actually don't know. I don't know if I decided that or if I've been like so programmed to that level that I can't realize that I didn't decide that for myself. But these are things we can explore, right? And the exploration takes practice. So I think those people, Sam, that you see where you look at them and you're like, they're just good. They're just good at not conforming to other people's expectations. If you guys met me when I was a kid, you wouldn't think we were the same person. Because I was literally like, tell me what to do and I will do it. And I will be the most obedient. Like, literally, I was that. And now I don't care at all what someone else expects me to be. I just be myself. It wasn't like from the time I was small, I was always like this, right? This is a conscious choice I made. Say, I feel more empowered when I feel like I'm doing something that's in alignment with me. And therefore, I practice that. And so now it looks like, oh, yeah, you just have a super strong will, right? Like, you'll just stand up for everything you believe in. No, not always. And it even depends on the situation now, right? Like, some things that aren't important to me, I'll be like, yeah, okay, whatever. Man, like, sure, let's have pizza instead of Chinese food, right? Like, I don't care. I don't want to make dinner. That's the point I'm trying to make. But like, I think it's a practice. What are your thoughts on that, Betty?
I agree. I definitely think it's a practice. Reflecting back on my younger self, I mean, I grew up as an Asian American daughter. That speaks volumes in and of itself of being someone who was taught to be a rule follower, that, questioning authority is a complete no-no. And growing up that way meant that I put so much more weight on what other people think than what I thought. But luckily, at the same time, I also grew up with a lot of elders. And there's something beautiful about folks who are older because they just don't give a shit anymore about what other people think, right? And I'm just like, that looks so freeing. I want to do that. And I don't want to wait until I'm 65 to do that. So I think getting some models in my life of how to do it. But I think, again, when we talked about integration earlier, it's like seeing it work for someone else doesn't always guarantee it'll work for you, or that certain way works for you, right? Like, I probably am still not someone who can right off the bat say, like, that's a terrible idea when someone's sharing something. I might think that inside, but I'm able to find different ways to communicate that later on if I need to. And it still feels authentic to me. I still feel like I get to own my voice and share what's on my mind afterwards as well. So I think just finding inspiration around you and just knowing what kind of support you need. And after a while, you start taking off the training wheels. And before you know it, you're helping someone else do the same thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm thinking about my grandma. My grandma is 92, and she just, like, I love her so much. She just does her and she says what she wants. and the thing that we don't really think about is that like I love that about her. Like, go lady, go. And you're 92. I hope I'm not spunky when I'm 92. But I think this is Sam's question, or Sam's point here is really interesting too. That it's a trade-off between authenticity in your small group of people, or masking and being, I'm going to put more accepted in quotation marks, because I don't think you're more accepted when you're masking, because you're not more accepted. Your mask is.
Yeah.
Right? The like edited version of you, which isn't actually you, is. And if there's one thing I've learned in the last, so I have two younger sisters. We have a competitive sister relationship. It's not the same for all sisters, but we have a very, like, the three of us, it's very competitive. And I'm always like, I'm going to be the best granddaughter and go do this. Like, kind of, it's like part of the fun now. But something that is like a really great realization story for me is that, so when I was pregnant with Nicholas, my sister was like, I'm going to throw you a baby shower. And I was like, okay, great. And in my head, a baby shower happens before the baby's born. So you have stuff for the baby. This was just my like rational brain saying that's when a baby shower happens. And my sister was planning the baby shower for like 2 months after Nicholas's due date. And I was so confused. And the story I told myself is like, that's just her doing what she wants, and she doesn't care about what I want. And blah, blah, blah. And like, the thing is that we hadn't even actually talked about why I thought it should be before and why she thought it should be after. And we had this big fight, a huge fight about it. And then I was driving home and I was like, well, crap. I didn't even tell her like my perspective of like why I was disappointed in her version of the party, right? And so I called her while I was on my way home, and luckily she answered the phone. And I said, like, I'm really sorry, but I need to just tell you where I'm coming from for this. And then she was like, oh, well, I get that. Here's where I'm coming from. I thought that people would want to meet the baby at the baby shower.
Also,
so you would need to have it after. And I was like, also a good point. Right? And we ended up having it after, and I was really super happy about having it after because I have all these pictures with my friends with my cute little baby, and it's like amazing. And so why do I share this story? This was both of us masking our true reasons for doing a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so neither of us could accept each other until we revealed the true reasons and our whys behind doing it. And then all of a sudden acceptance was available. So I always just think it's a great example of like when we're keeping all those things to ourselves, when we're masking that and we're like, well, I'm not going to tell them that because that might hurt their feelings, right? Like that's not really acceptance, right? It might be peace. You might have office peace and quiet because everybody just like accepts things. But I wouldn't say it's actually you truly being accepted as a person.
Yeah. And it's peace on the surface level because the Cold War is happening underneath, right? Like everyone's still feeling all those not so pleasant feelings about each other.
Right.
And I do think it's something that our survival brain has taught us that it's a trade-off because it's inevitable. Like you said earlier, we're going to show up the way we are, and someone out there is not going to be happy about it. And we could fixate on that experience, and our younger minds probably have, right, to keep us safe, because we are social beings as humans. We want to be accepted. We want to belong. But also, like, I think every time I do make the choice to say something that made me feel nervous but is actually true a part of myself, I get a wave of relieved sighs back, right? Because there's other people in the room who's like, okay, I feel like I can do this now. Even if they don't agree with what I'm saying, they're like, oh, I'm so glad Betty broke that seal, right? Because now we can have the real conversation that we need to have. And I think with that, we start to accept each other and the differences in each other, which I think is much more colorful and important. Like, I don't want to just be in a room with everybody who acts and thinks exactly like I am, right? So it creates a much more expanded sense of community too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to bring it back to the topic because we've talked a lot about expansion and space for exploring all of these things. And at the end of the day, when we need to find out what we're going to do next, we're talking about an action, right? So I'm going to do something. Today, we're not talking about that scenario of like, I could just sit here and do nothing. We're talking about doing something. So Betty, what are the things? So we've talked about a whole bunch of things today, but when we're getting to that point of like making a decision, from your perspective, like what's one of the most or some of the most important things to tap into that allows us to take the next step, to do the action?
Yeah. I mean, maybe this is too simple, but like your why, right? Like why are you doing it? Either that doesn't have to be like, why is my life in existence? It doesn't have to be that existential at times. It can be if you want to. But just like, why am I choosing this next action? Why am I looking for a new job? Why am I looking to negotiate? Like, it's just helping you reground in what is the purpose behind you taking this action. And again, back to the positive what if everything does go well? Like, what are those things I want to see happen out of this experience? So that's one of my go-tos, at least.
Yeah, I think the why is really powerful, and thanks to Simon Sinek, everybody's talking about it, so that's good. One of the things that it's related to the why, but for me, I have a thing I'm trying to do in life, right? It's related to my why, but it's to optimize human potential. So for me, when I look at a decision of like, what client should I take, or what opportunity should I say yes to, or what opportunity should I say no to, it always comes back to me asking myself the question, how does this decision impact my ability in a positive way to create more human potential in the world? And does it, or does it not? Because if it might be neutral, right? But like if it's negative, then it's a no, like hard no, right? Like this thing, I got invited to a trade show earlier this week, and I was just like, this is not, I think this is, I appreciate the invite and I appreciate you thinking about me, and no, this is not aligned with where I'm going. And so it might, like, if you're looking at this, so right now, one of the problems you don't know what to do next in is a business scenario, then you might think that there's like business logic and research and industry knowledge that you need in order to make that decision. There's also that personal investment, right? Like, why am I doing this? You are doing this, right? You're choosing to go find another job. You're choosing to go for a promotion. You're choosing to start your own business. If you're going to choose that, why? Why are you doing that? Like Robert brought up here, that you should have an exit plan, or does that give you an out from the beginning, meaning that you aren't totally invested? I think it's an interesting question, because especially in a business scenario, right? Because I think a lot of people are always like, what's my exit strategy? Like, am I going to sell this company eventually? Am I going to just like run it till I die? Am I going to try and pass it on to my kids? Like, what am I going to try and do with this? And Bob, I think you know enough about me at this point. I don't believe in shoulds, right? Like, I don't know what you should do. What feels right for you, right? Does it feel like it makes sense to have an exit plan? Why do you think you would need an exit plan? For some people, yes, it might be an easy out. For some people, it might be strategic and reasonable, right? So I think it's really important to, again, look at your perspective of, if I don't know what to do next and I'm going to choose something to do next, I don't think it's a bad idea to have an exit plan. Do you have to have an exit plan? Well, is it really an exit, or are we like pivoting? Or like, I mean, if you're looking at it from the LinkedIn Live scenario, it's just me like, hey, I tried this. I didn't like it. Maybe I'll try it a couple of times with other people to see if I like it, just to like, I tell my husband this about curries all the time, because I'm like, just because you've tasted one curry doesn't mean you don't like all curries, right? There's so many different varieties of curry out there. You can try it, but like, maybe that's something that makes you feel safe, right? If that is something that makes you feel safe going to the next stage, then sure, have an exit strategy. But then also ask yourself the question, why do you think you need an exit strategy?
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Yeah. So good. Okay, Sam's got a last question. And I'm sorry I did not get to all of the wonderful comments. You team had a wonderful comments today. Sam saying, I am incapable of masking. No matter how hard I try to save myself or others, it causes me so many issues. And I think this is a really great place to end for today, because this is where I wonder. Like, I'm always big on like, what do you wonder? But one of the things I wonder is, why do we think that masking ourselves is what saves other people? Where does that story come from? And like, I'm not like a therapist, right? So I'm not going to go back and figure out this came from this day when this person said this to me. I don't like it could have come from lots of places. But I think this is something that is like a commonly held belief that we don't question, right? If I mask, it's safer for other people.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's safer for the wrong people. That's my bold statement in that scenario. What do you think, Betty?
I think what's coming up for me is, and I'm familiar with this too, of like this impulse to protect others, this impulse to save others. But something I've been more present to, and I'm not sure if it'll support you in figuring this out, Sam, is just where does the belief that we need to save them come from? Right? Not specifically where, but like I do want to be someone who moves through this world believing that every one of us are whole. We might show up momentarily not feeling that way or doing our best, but just like understanding that everyone has the capacity to be responsible for their feelings, to be responsible for their choices, and that if we keep doing things to keep them safe, we're actually not doing a justice for their growth and their potential as well.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I said this earlier in the context of communication or community on the live I was speaking on earlier is that community is not something that can be served to you, right? Mm-hmm. It's something you participate in. And I think a lot of times when we think about safety and we're keeping either them physically safe or keeping their feelings safe, that we're responsible for that. Like I'm responsible for keeping your feelings safe. And that's not a relationship, right? Mm-hmm. That's the walking on eggshells scenario. And I don't know for you guys, but for me, that has not worked in my life. And yeah, every time I'll just share this. Every time I have stepped out of my role of keeping someone else safe and done what I thought was right to do, it helped the other person. It may not have felt like that in the immediate moment for them. The example I'm thinking of is when I left my corporate job. The reason why I stayed there so long is because I felt like I needed to protect my team. And I was like, the relationship I had was not one I wanted them to have. So I was like the buffer in the middle. And if I wasn't there, then they would get all that heavy rain, right? And I was like, but at some point in their life, they're going to need an umbrella. So what if they don't know how to hold one, right? Like that's not very responsible for me. And I left, and within 6 months, everybody else had left as well, which is everybody else's own journey, right? Mm-hmm. But it's an interesting area to explore. Where are you trading your journey for the safety of others? Mm-hmm. And when we're looking at, for us, what do we want to do next? What's the thing that makes sense for us to do on our journey? That's going to work for some people and it's going to not work for other people. And we need to listen to that voice of like, what would I do? What would I do?
Yeah. And it's a simple, but not an easy task. So like, you know, I'm still thinking of what Sam is saying. Like, if it feels like the impulse that shows up first is, oh, I got to caretake for everybody else's feelings, maybe they're not the folks that are best suited to support you in terms of listening and like rediscovering what's true to you. Maybe there needs to be another set of folks that can just accept you exactly as who you are, hold their feelings and hold yours at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And Jay has a great final. In the end, we must trust ourselves and be true to ourselves. Anything else will lead in the wrong direction. Amen, Jay. Mic drop, Jay. Perfect way to end the episode. So, Betty, if people are really intrigued by what they heard from you today and would like to connect further, where is the best place for them to do that?
Right here on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. Let me know that you joined this. I love ongoing conversations, so I'm a very curious person, so I totally welcome that in my inbox as well. But otherwise, you can find me on my website at heybettychan.com.
So awesome. Definitely connect with Betty. This is always a pleasure to chat with you, my friend. And thank you so much to Sam and Jay and Bob and Steven. And who else do we have in the chat? There's lots of chats today. You guys are killing it. I know I'm missing one and I don't want to. Oh, Yolanda and Jackie. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. And remember, this isn't a one-off conversation. These types of conversations don't solve themselves in one 60-minute chat. So make sure you connect with me, connect with Betty, connect with those of you who are in the chat together, and continue the conversation. So if you happen to be in the area where you're not quite sure what to do next, then let's talk about it, right? What can that hurt? Betty, thank you so much for all of your lovely insights today. And until next time, everybody, permission to do you.
All right. Have a good one.